Imagine yourself in a vast desert, a place where the only thing you can see ahead is a long stretch of endless sand, scorching heat, and an oppressive silence. It is an environment where each step is harder than the last, and where thirst and exhaustion seem unbearable. In this place, it feels like there is no sign of life, no promising horizon. Only emptiness, effort, and the desire for this path to have a purpose. But what if I told you that even the desert, this dry and barren place, has a divine purpose for your life? That every difficult step, every lonely moment, every tear shed in the silence of the night has a greater meaning that you cannot yet see? Oftentimes, our lives resemble this desert. We go through moments that seem endless, face difficulties that challenge us, and we often question, why am I here? What is the purpose of all this? In the midst of struggles, it feels as if God is silent, and that sense of abandonment can be overwhelming. But it is precisely in that silence that something deep is being built within us. Hope. Hope in the midst of the desert is believing that there is a purpose for every struggle we face, even if we do not yet understand why. The word hope is mentioned countless times in Scripture, always associated with perseverance and trust in divine power. However, the true essence of hope is only revealed when we are in the desert, when we face life's storms and are challenged to keep walking, even when everything seems lost. God allows us to go through deserts to shape our character, to strengthen our faith, and to prepare us for the purpose He has for us. When we read the stories of those who have walked through the desert before us, we realize that the desert journey always precedes great victories and transformations. Think of Moses, who spent 40 years in the desert before being called to free the people. Or Jesus, who spent 40 days and 40 nights in the desert before beginning his ministry. These deserts were not punishments, but times of preparation, times of growth, where hope was tested and proven. It is hard to see the purpose while we are in the middle of our struggles, but hope in the desert teaches us to trust that every difficulty is an important chapter of our journey. God knows what He is doing even when everything seems meaningless in the moment. He uses trials to teach us, to refine us, and to prepare us for something much greater than we could imagine. If you are going through a desert right now, remember that hope is the strength that keeps you standing. This hope is the thread that connects each difficult moment to a greater purpose. It is what makes us believe that, despite the circumstances, there is a reason for every struggle we face. Sometimes, the desert forces us to strip away everything we thought we needed, so that we can discover that the only essential thing is God's presence beside us. So, even if the journey is long, even if the trials are many, hope in the desert reminds us that God is with us and that He will never abandon us. He is working even when we don't see it, and the purpose of every struggle is to transform us, strengthen us, and help us reach the promises He has for our lives. Many of us have asked, in the midst of difficulties, why does God allow me to go through such a tough season? This is a profound question that carries a nearly universal pain, a feeling that resonates with all who have faced their personal battles. And in the search for answers, we often find ourselves trapped in a cycle of doubt. But there is something powerful we need to understand about the desert and why God allows us to walk through this dry and challenging terrain. The desert, in spiritual life, is not just a physical place, but a metaphor for those times of difficulty, loneliness, and trials that we all experience. This desert can take many forms: an unexpected loss, a financial crisis, illness, betrayal, or the end of a relationship. But as painful as the desert is, God allows it not as a punishment, but as preparation. He allows the desert to shape and strengthen us, to reveal our true essence, and to teach us lessons we would never learn in times of comfort. In the Bible, the desert is recurrent, always appearing before great transformations. When God led the people of Israel through the desert, He was teaching them that survival, hope, and true peace do not come from what we have or can control, but from complete trust in His provision and love. The desert is the place where we are stripped of everything we thought was essential: material security, external supports, certainty, so that, in the end, we can realize that our true security and sustenance come solely from God. But why does this lesson need to be taught in the desert? Because it is in the desert that we are confronted with ourselves. It is where our fears, doubts, and limitations are exposed and tested. In the desert, there is no place to hide our weaknesses, our deepest feelings, and often our lack of faith. God allows the desert because it reveals who we truly are, and at the same time, it reveals the power He can exercise in us when we fully trust in Him. Think of the example of Moses, who spent 40 years in the desert before being called by God to deliver the people of Israel. During those years, Moses was shaped, refined, and prepared for the great mission ahead. The desert was a time of growth and spiritual maturity. Moses learned to hear God's voice and to trust His direction. Only after this experience was he ready to lead an entire nation. So it is in our lives as well. God allows the desert because he wants to equip us, prepare us for something greater that is yet to come. He uses difficulties to teach us perseverance, patience, and true trust. Without these moments of solitude and trial, we would be unprepared to face the challenges and blessings he has already planned for us. So, if you are going through a desert right now, remember that there is a purpose to this journey. God doesn't want you to merely survive the desert. He wants you to come out of it transformed, strengthened, and ready to fulfill the greater purpose he has prepared for your life. The desert is more than just a place of trial, it is a mirror of our soul, a terrain where we are led to confront what we carry inside. When everything around us seems scarce and adverse, the desert forces us to look inward and deal with what is often hidden beneath the surface. In these conditions, we are compelled to face fears, doubts, and even parts of ourselves we don't want to admit exist. And it is here that the desert reveals profound truths about ourselves and our faith. When we are in the desert, far from our comfort zone and deprived of the certainties of everyday life, we realize how easy it is to trust in God when everything is going well, but how challenging it becomes when we face emptiness. This contrast exposes the strength, or fragility, of our faith. Is our trust in God genuine, or does it depend on our circumstances? It is in the desert that this question takes on depth, and the silence of the answers teaches us to listen to God's voice with an open heart. The desert also reveals who we are in struggles, who we are in the absence of control, who we are when we need patience, resilience, and unwavering faith. Without the distractions that usually occupy our minds, we are stripped of the illusions we create about ourselves. There, between the scorching sun and silence, God allows us to see how much we try to control, how much our faith depends on quick answers, and how sometimes we seek human solutions to problems that only He can solve. In addition to revealing our weaknesses, the desert shows us our spiritual strength. As we go through difficult moments, we discover a strength that doesn't come from us but from something greater, from a faith that grows as it is tested. It is here that we understand that faith is not an escape or an immediate solution, but a walk of perseverance and trust. As we move forward, we realize that true faith grows stronger in struggles, expands in emptiness, and solidifies in the trust that God knows what He's doing, even when we don't understand. The desert also teaches us about the value of dependence. Without resources or external help, we are left with no alternative but to trust entirely in God. He becomes our sustenance, our security, our source of hope. And ironically, as we experience this deep dependence, we discover a freedom that only trust in God can provide. We begin to see that, despite our weakness, He is enough, and this brings peace to our soul. When we come out of the desert, we return transformed. We return with a faith that is not based on circumstances, but on deep convictions. We return knowing that, no matter what we face, the God who was with us in the desert will be with us anywhere else. The desert reveals our true faith, not so that we feel defeated, but so that we understand the power of a faith that grows, that becomes rooted, that strengthens through struggles. This is the beauty of the desert. It exposes what is most fragile but also what is strongest in us. It reveals who we are and, more importantly, reveals who God is in us. When we face moments of pain, we ask ourselves, why me? Or why is this happening to me? Suffering is never easy to accept, and often it's difficult to understand its purpose. But throughout our spiritual journey, we are reminded that even in the toughest trials, God works in silence, building something grand and transformative in our lives. The desert, with its tests and challenges, is not just a place of suffering, but a deep preparation for what's to come. It's here that God begins to fulfill His divine purpose in us. God never leads us into the desert without a reason. In every trial, He plants seeds of growth and shapes us for a future only He knows. In the process, He teaches us to trust not only in His promises, but in His presence. The trials, as difficult as they may be, directly connect us to God, forcing us to seek His guidance and depend on Him in ways we might never have before. In the midst of the desert, we are invited to understand that our strength has limits, but God's power does not. The divine purpose in trials is also to transform our experiences of pain into a testimony of hope for others. By facing and overcoming our own battles, God empowers us to help those still struggling. Our story of triumph becomes a living proof of God's love and power, an example of how He strengthens us and helps us overcome even in the darkest situations. Every trial we overcome becomes a message of faith for those who are just beginning their journey. Another purpose of trials is to teach us humility and compassion. In the desert, we come to understand how much we depend on God and how much we need each other. These lessons in humility and compassion transform us into people more sensitive to the suffering of others, more willing to extend a hand and be instruments of love and help. The desert teaches us to look beyond ourselves, to see the pain of others, and to share our hope and faith. It is natural to want to avoid trials, but the truth is that it is in these moments that our faith is strengthened. God uses these experiences to remove what we don't need, so we can be refined and prepared for something greater. Trials are the fire that purifies, the wind that shapes, and at the end of the process, we emerge stronger, wiser, and closer to God. The divine purpose in trials, ultimately, is to help us grow in faith, wisdom, and compassion. He transforms us so that we can live with purpose, understand our mission, and be ready for everything He has already planned for us. Every trial is an essential part of our journey, and even though we may not yet see the greatness of what God is doing, He continues to work, guiding us toward a life that reflects His love, strength, and purpose. The desert, with its vast, arid, and solitary expanse, often makes us question whether we have the strength to continue. When difficulties seem endless, maintaining hope and faith can feel impossible. But it is precisely in this moment of vulnerability that we find the opportunity to strengthen our relationship with God and understand that, even in silence and apparent absence of answers, He is present. So, how can we maintain hope and faith while crossing the desert? First, it's essential to remember that faith is not just a belief in something higher, but an active trust that renews with each step, even on the hardest days. Keeping faith means continuing to walk, one step at a time, believing that God is by our side, even if we cannot see the end of the journey. On days when the weight of trials makes us consider giving up, we can remind ourselves of God's promises. He assured us that He would never leave us alone, that He would be our guide, and that, in the end, the desert would become a testimony of His faithfulness and love. To nourish this faith, we need to seek God's Word daily. The Bible is filled with stories of men and women who faced their own deserts but maintained hope through adversity. These stories, when meditated upon with an open heart, become fuel for our faith. They remind us that those who wait on the Lord renew their strength, that God is a refuge in times of distress, and that in every desert, He gives us the strength to move forward. Reading and reflecting on these promises strengthens our spirit and reminds us that we are sustained by a faithful God. Another crucial step is prayer. In the desert, prayer becomes more than words. It becomes a deep dialogue with God, a moment where we surrender our fears, weaknesses, and doubts. When we pray, we are not just asking for help, we are building a bridge between our hearts and God's heart. And even if our prayers seem to go unanswered immediately, they create in us a peace that surpasses all understanding, for we know that God is listening and that He knows every detail of our journey. Maintaining hope in the desert also means surrounding ourselves with people of faith. Although the desert may seem like a solitary experience, there are times when we need support. Sharing our struggles with people who understand us and can pray for us is an act of humility and courage. God often uses others to remind us of His promises and to strengthen us when our own strength seems to fail. There is no shame in seeking help. In fact, it is a way of recognizing that we all need support on our journey. Finally, a powerful way to maintain hope is by practicing gratitude, even in the desert. It may seem contradictory, but finding small reasons to be thankful, even in the midst of pain, transforms our perspective. Gratitude helps us focus not just on what is lacking, but on what God has already done and continues to do in our lives. Every act of gratitude is a declaration of faith that God is still in control, that He is present, and that, in the end, the desert will be just one chapter in our story, not the end of it. In the midst of the desert, we may not understand everything God is doing, but we can trust that He is shaping us and preparing us for something greater. By maintaining hope and faith, we walk not based on what we see but on what we believe. We know that each step brings us closer to God's purpose, and that, in the end, crossing the desert will become a testimony of God's power and faithfulness. The desert is a place where we not only face trials but where we are transformed. The journey through the desert never leaves us the same. Every difficulty, every moment of pain, and every tear sown bears fruit that prepares us for the future God has reserved for us. Although we often view the desert only as a period of suffering, it is, in fact, the ground where God plants and cultivates strength, abilities, and lessons that will later bloom in our lives. The fruits of the desert are valuable because they are born from experience, deep learning, and our spiritual growth. First and foremost, the desert generates in us a resilience that can only be built in times of hardship. When we face periods of scarcity, we learn to appreciate what truly matters. Every challenge in the desert strengthens us and prepares us for future moments, so we can face the trials to come with wisdom. This inner strength, born in the silence of the desert, gives us the ability to move forward, to handle adversity, and to help others who are also going through their own deserts. This fruit of resilience is a gift that sustains us and could not have been acquired under easier circumstances. The desert also teaches us about dependence on God, a fruit that changes the way we live and view the world. When we are in the desert, we are forced to let go of our own control and trust completely in God. We learn to rely on Him for every step, for every advance, and to see that in our weakness, His strength is made manifest. This fruit of dependence on God makes us humble, reminds us that we do not need to carry the weight of the world alone, and that our true source of security and provision is in Him, not in our own resources. Another precious fruit of the desert is patience. In the desert, time seems to drag on. Answers do not come as quickly as we would like, and the waiting continuously tests us. This waiting teaches us to trust in God's timing, to understand that He has a purpose in every second of silence, and that His answer comes at the right moment in perfect timing. The patience cultivated in the desert prepares us for a life of peace, where we know that no matter how pressured the circumstances, God is in control and working on our behalf. The desert also generates in us an unshakable faith. After crossing a desert and experiencing God's sustaining power, our faith becomes as firm as a rock. We see that He never abandons us, even in the darkest hours. And this fruit of faith becomes an anchor for the future, strengthening us in every situation and reminding us that, if God was with us in the desert, He will surely be with us in any circumstance. This faith does not depend on circumstances or fleeting emotions. It is solid, rooted in our personal experience with the God who sustained us in the desert. Finally, the desert generates in us a profound sense of purpose. After going through this journey, we begin to see that our trials were not in vain. The desert reveals to us that every suffering, every prayer, every sleepless night was part of a larger plan. This fruit of purpose gives us direction, helps us see beyond the present difficulties, and live with greater meaning. We know that everything we face has a reason, that God will use our experience to help others, to prepare us for something greater, and to make us instruments in His hands. The fruits of the desert stay with us for life. They transform us into stronger, more compassionate, and more centered people. When we emerge from the desert, we are ready to face the future, knowing that we have been shaped and prepared to live God's purpose. These fruits are a testament to His faithfulness and a reminder that, no matter how hard the path, the desert always produces something eternal and valuable in us. When we emerge from the desert, it may feel like we've finally reached the end of the trial. However, the journey of life continues, and with it, new challenges, new battles, and new lessons will arise. Even when we think we can't bear another difficult season, we must remember, God never abandons us. The desert is only a stage in our spiritual walk, but God's presence remains with us through every phase, every new obstacle, and every new triumph. In our journey, God's character and faithfulness are the foundations that sustain us. He is not with us only in good times or when everything seems clear and secure. On the contrary, it is in difficulties that His presence is stronger and closer. The Bible is filled with promises that remind us that God is faithful and will never leave us. "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you," Hebrews 13 verse 5, is a promise that guides and comforts us, whether in the desert or in victory. God's faithfulness is an anchor that keeps us steadfast and full of hope. The journey continues because in every new experience, there is an opportunity for growth and for building our faith. With what we've learned in the desert, we carry spiritual baggage that makes us more resilient and more aware of God's presence in our lives. We know that no matter what we face, the God who guided us in the past is the same God who is with us today. He knows our limits, our weaknesses, and our strengths, and He promises not to allow us to carry a burden greater than we can bear. As we continue on this walk, it's important to remember that we are not alone. God places people, resources, and signs of His hand along our path to support and guide us. Often, He works in subtle ways through small gestures, words of encouragement, or unexpected situations that bring us comfort. These manifestations are reminders that He is always present, even when the road gets tough. Every step taken in His presence is a step of faith, and every stage of the journey strengthens our confidence that He is the infallible guide of our lives. Moreover, the certainty that God will never abandon us gives us the courage to face what lies ahead. Life may bring new deserts, new challenges, and even new moments of silence. But now, after all we've lived through, we know that God's silence does not mean His absence. On the contrary, it is part of the process in which He works in our hearts and our faith. When we remain steadfast in the trust that He is by our side, we gain a peace that surpasses all understanding and prepares us for the next chapters of our journey. So, at the end of each season, we remember that walking with God is a continuous journey, but not a solitary one. Every desert we overcome brings us closer to Him and transforms us into stronger, more spiritually mature people, more prepared to live according to His purpose. The journey continues, yes, but it is filled with the faithful presence of a God who walks alongside us, who knows every step we take, and who, above all, promises to be with us until the end. With Him, we move forward, ready to face whatever comes, with the assurance that we will never be alone. And so we conclude yet another chapter in this journey of faith and hope. If this message touched your heart and you believe it can make a difference in someone's life, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and share this video. Your action might be the boost someone needs to keep believing even in the desert. Let's spread the word of hope and faith together. May God bless you in every step of your walk, and see you in the next video. Comment below what you thought of the video and the message shared.